And that's why we have people like Amber Lyon on the broadcast, because she really is a hero. She was making a lot of money, was successful, had won 3 Emmys for journalism and for stories and best camera talent reporter. She covered all sorts of war zones and the BP oil spill, you name it. And then when there were Western-backed countries in the Middle East killing men, women, and children, and she was going to do reports on that, she got censored and told she couldn't, and the reports got killed, even though she was there and had the video, risking her life and others. And then she learned that these governments were paying, in some cases, $400,000 to kill each episode. So CNN was almost using her journalism as behind the scenes a blackmail tool is really what's going on. Now CNN, since she left, is imploding into an entertainment channel. Piers Morgan had votes last night by his viewers, and they found that my appearance on his show was the highlight of the year. And it's because it broke with the script. And joining us from Australia on the international book tour for her new book, Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray, the big coffee table book full of photos, but also blurbs and articles, is Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray. And when you buy it, we're not selling it, we should be, you are supporting true independent journalism. And while she talks, we'll flip through some of it on the air for you so you can see some of what she covers in here. But she gets into a whole area of pre-revolutionary protests, whiskey rebellions, slave rebellions, the labor movement, women's suffrage, civil rights. And then she moves into what's happening today, the Vietnam War, Kent State, gay rights, and then Pepper Sprayed, A Tale of Two. I mean, this is just a really powerful book. I couldn't put it down when I started looking at it today before the show. And regardless of what you think about it, it's a celebration of the First Amendment, a celebration of journalism, and cuts across political lines. So AmberLyonLive.com is the site. Amber, so good for you to stay up late. I mean, what time is it, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning in Australia?
Yeah, it's really early. It's about 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. here now, Alex. Thank you so much for having me on. It was worth waking up for.
Well, it's always good to see your beaming face and spirit. Well, you've got the floor. Tell us about what you're doing, what you've been through since you were on with us 6 months ago or so. And I know you were going to be on the nightly news tonight as well, but, I mean, just looking at all the things that are happening and the world and the NSA and just all of it coming out, just give us your take on the world in general.
Well, right now, I think the world is waking up. We're seeing an expanded consciousness worldwide that really fills me with a lot of hope, especially when you saw the American people and the people worldwide stand up and say, enough is enough, and we don't want this attack on Syria. To me, that was emblematic of a shift in consciousness we're facing worldwide, and something that can make all of us smile a little bit because the people are waking up. And since we last spoke, Alex, I've just been working on this book, and it's been a crazy but exciting journey. And I think the book is super important because I saw that the mainstream media was demonizing protest and making people think that protesters didn't have a sound message and protest was a waste of time. And I published this book to remind the American people that protest has been the common denominator for change throughout history. And if we want things to change, we're going to have to stand up and fight for our rights, Alex.
Well, you're absolutely right, Amber. And I know that since you've been on with us, you've been traveling the world and doing investigative journalism in some dangerous situations. Tell us about some of your latest exploits.
Well, as of now, I've been traveling investigating natural medicines. I feel like a lot of these medicines are being demonized, and not only that, they're being withheld from the American public in what I consider to be one of the greatest human rights tragedies of our generation. And so I've been, since March of last year, I've literally been on the road nonstop investigating these medicines, and I'm currently writing a book for people to show them how they can access them instead of just relying on prescription drugs, which are, as you know, Alex, talk about this a lot on your show, turning the nation into zombies and addicts as well. One of my last stories I did for CNN was on these babies being born addicted to prescription medications. This NICU in East Tennessee literally had to build an extra wing just to handle all these babies being born addicted. And that's a story that's not being covered enough as well, that I'm going to be covering in the book too.
Wow.
But in addition to that, I finished up covering protests across the U.S. I traveled the U.S. for a year covering the Occupy protests, covering teacher protests, home foreclosure protests, really just any event where the little guy was standing up for his rights.
Talk to us about the nature of where you see the First Amendment as an award-winning journalist who's trained in understanding it, with the way the free speech zones operate, the way the riot police operate, the way this culture is converting to what we see in third world countries and dictatorships, quite frankly, but they're still branding it as freedom because we went up to cover JFK and we're totally peaceful and we're physically attacked, punched, hit, you name it, for peacefully being there. The Dallas police said, no, you have a right to be here, First Amendment. And then the feds had the deputized sheriff's deputies physically attack us, and they looked like people out of central casting from a maximum security prison. Who did attack us. And it's just, you don't want to think bad of the police. You want to believe in the system. But when it becomes tyrannical in your face, you're a fool to deny it. So your book, incredible photojournalism in here, and firsthand accounts that it goes through. Talk about the state of the First Amendment in this country.
Well, it's at a disturbing state right now, Alex. Like you were describing, we're seeing a rampant amount of police militarization to the point that people are being intimidated to even hit the streets and protest. One of the protests I covered in the book, the Anaheim police brutality protest, ironically enough, the people were protesting against police brutality when the police started opening fire on crowds of women and children using less lethal rounds, which we all know can be lethal if they hit you in the head or in the wrong location. And I was even fired at by the Anaheim Police Department as I was standing in the middle of a busy street photographing a dumpster that had been set on fire. A wall of police started firing up on me, and I had to run. I was in such shock because, as you mentioned, Alex, I have traveled all around the world covering protests in countries that we consider to be run by dictators and we consider to be more dangerous than the U.S., but I have never been directly shot at like that in my entire career. And I was just in shock, and I had to run between two trucks to avoid being hit. And when I emerged from the truck screaming press, one of the officers said to me, "Don't you know how to cover a protest? You need to stand back here." And he pointed behind the police line where all the other journalists were corralled. And I believe I was fired upon because they didn't want me out there documenting these injuries. I had photographs of pedestrians who'd been hit in the back of their legs with these projectiles. And not only that, one of the next days when the protesters hit the streets, police showed up dressed in full camo gear, Alex. That was another double take I had to do. I felt like I was in Egypt. They were wearing camouflage clothing and camo and military boots and heavily armed for a protest that it was almost a joke. Like you either had to laugh or cry because this protest consisted mostly of Hispanic women and children who were unarmed. We're just seeing a disturbing rate of this police militarization, and I definitely exposed that in the book because it just became a common thread at all of these protests, Alex, and people like to believe we have the freedom to exercise our First Amendment rights in the United States, but when you have police directly intimidating protesters, then we're not able to do so. And I know a lot of police are good. You know, police officers, many of them do get in the field to protect our freedoms, but they're doing the exact opposite. And as a failure...
Well, that's right. The directive from on top is towards authoritarianism. And as you know, our government and the special interests that control it are on record all over the world trying to put authoritarian regimes in because they want to manage and extract the resources. They're treating us exactly the same. So this is a top-down operation.
Exactly. And where's the outrage, Alex? Like, why, this is what I don't understand. Why aren't the people saying enough is enough and really standing up and fighting back against this police militarization. This is a slippery slope. And we're seeing this, I mean, even from when I started covering the protests in September 2011 to now, look at the change in the police attire. Police are now heading to these protests dressed like they're in some Judge Dredd movie. And I think they're doing that because they're getting away with it. The American public is allowing this to happen and sitting back and not standing up for our rights.
Now, Amber, when we come back, I want to get into some of the big breaking news with the NSA, free speech in America, the attack on the press. I want to get your take as a journalist on the things that are happening here right now. And then tell us what you're seeing over in Australia. I'm Alex Jones, folks. Stay with us. So going back to Amber Lyon. Amber, where are you specifically in Australia right now?
I'm in Sydney.
How incredible is it that you can be in Australia, I can be here in Austin, I've got reporters on the street. I mean, if the citizens start using this and seeing themselves as important, which they are, it's over. Most of the news we end up breaking now comes from our listeners. Mainstream media doesn't even know how to do that. So how are you as a professional journalist, now as a guerrilla journalist, how do you see that fusing together in the future?
Well, are you talking about the ability to use, report news on your cell phone?
Sure, just everything. I mean, what do you see this revolution? I don't see the establishment being able to control it.
No, I don't think so either. And I think they're shaking in their boots. It's quite disturbing for them that they can't control it anymore. And I think Syria was the perfect example of that. And that's where social media spread the truth about what was happening on the ground in Syria. And it spread so rapidly across the tentacles of the web that the elite's narrative wasn't accepted by the public. And the public stood up and said, we're not going to enter. And as far as just social media in general, as a journalist, I always tell journalism students, I'm so jealous of these young journalists just getting into the field right now because they have so much power. All you need to do is set up a website and have just a cell phone camera and take donations off your website, and you can bypass the dinosaur gatekeepers of the media and have your own success. And we've seen a lot of journalists do that as well. One of them who's doing it very well is, not only you, Alex, also ones who've just taken it into their own hands to create their own entity online. And that used to be nearly impossible because you had all these gatekeepers really controlling the message. So for me, this all gives me a lot of hope because the people are taking back the power, and we're seeing this happen at a rate that cannot be controlled anymore.
You're right. I want to shift gears and talk about free speech with you. Whether you agree with what the Duck Dynasty patriarch said, or whether you disagree, or whether you agree. I mean, it doesn't matter for me. The fact is he said it in a magazine interview, and now they've kicked him off the show. And it's the same thing with the Christmas cards. Kids should be able to hand out Christmas cards. That's their personal free speech. And I really see out of the so-called left more and more authoritarianism. I'm just a libertarian. And I see in your book, the story of people on the left and the right being abused. But are you concerned about out-of-control political correctness, or what is your view on the Duck Dynasty controversy?
Well, I think that any time that someone is censored because of their beliefs, that I don't accept it, especially as a journalist who was censored. You're just seeing the corporate control of the media, and it's really just making it so it's just dumbing down society, because anytime anyone speaks anything politically, they're censored. And,
sure.
And not only that, it sends a chilling effect across all of these shows.
Well, that's right. And it's left, right, center, libertarian. Anything that's pertinent, anything that makes waves, they shut it down. And they can say, well, we own the printing press. Yeah, but they got it through fraud, through collusion, and it's so centralized. And then they're trying to create a chilling effect, like with you. I mean, you exposed war crimes, and then they blocked it, and then you learned they've been paid off.
Exactly, and that was very disturbing for me as a journalist, because at one end of the building, my crew and I were risking our lives to expose this brutal regime, and then at the the other end of the building, CNN was taking money from them in exchange for producing these positive programmings that made the regime look look like they were democratic and really helping the people, when what we saw on the ground was the exact opposite. And I believe, Alex, that that's happening across the board within the corporate press, especially because after I exposed what was happening at CNN, I didn't get much mainstream coverage, which was kind of, for me, indicative of the fact that a lot of these...
Stay there. We're going to come back and talk about that with our guest straight ahead, Amber Lyon. Going back to Amber Lyon, who was censored at CNN and basically pressured to leave, but she left, I guess, on her own accord. She can remind me if I'm wrong, but I'm going from memory. For going to battle zones and seeing Western-backed regimes killing men, women, and children, she had the footage. It later came out that it was true, and then she later learned that those governments were literally, what was it, $400 and what thousand being paid to CNN to spike your story? I mean, that's incredible. Recap that briefly, because it's so important, and then I want to tie it into all the things we see happening today and where you see this going.
Well, CNN never gave, I even requested to get an amount of money that they were getting paid by the Bahrain Economic Development Board, and they never revealed that. I don't know where the $400,000 figure comes from, but as far as my reporting goes, we weren't able to reveal an exact amount, but we did find out that CNN was getting paid by the Bahrain regime, and not only by Bahrain, but by regimes worldwide, in exchange for producing positive content disguised as news that they sprinkled into their regular programming with little or no disclosure to viewers, and not only little or no disclosure to viewers, but no disclosure to CNN's own reporters. And so what happened is I had gone to Bahrain to cover the uprising there, and we uncovered some pretty brutal crimes by that regime that's being backed by the U.S. And when I got back to the United States, at first I was able to go on CNN and report on what was happening, and then it became I had more and more red tape go up. It became nearly impossible to get stories on about Bahrain, and our documentary on the Arab Spring and the Bahrain Revolution, which was one of the most damning reports against this regime to date, never aired on CNN International. And after some prompting by executives who wrote me and said that you should investigate this, that something suspicious is going on, we were able to uncover that CNN had been getting paid by Bahrain. Bahrain was a paying customer there for years.
Yeah, I saw a news story where it came out, and that's where I get that memory of where one of those governments, it was 400,000+ for some of the PR stuff. And it's, again, CNN is not disclosing this. And now I see the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on ABC News, the London Guardian, CNN, or on the site it will say, this week on ABC News, brought to you by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But you watch it, it's their whole agenda during the show, never telling you that. And it just shows the propaganda placement is getting worse and worse.
And that was the problem at CNN, is that they have been taking money from Kazakhstan, the Ukraine, Nigeria, Lebanon, Bahrain, and they've been just sprinkling these programs that they were paid by these regimes to create into the regular news programming. So with little or no disclosure to viewers. So the average viewer would probably have no idea they're watching a sponsored segment. And that, to me, was what I found the most disturbing. Not only that, as a journalist, that I wasn't told that that the regime I was investigating was also a paying customer at the network. And so above all, I think we're having a little bit of a disconnect with these networks, Alex, as to what is true journalism. Journalism is printing what someone else doesn't want printed. Everything else is public relations. And we're just seeing too much public relations now and advertising mixed in the mix, and it makes it very difficult to trust these networks for an accurate picture of what's happening overseas, not only overseas, but here in the U.S.
And I have an article here out of Reuters, superbug bacteria widespread in U.S. chicken consumer group, and that a lot of people are getting sick from it. So if you have some little plant that has salmonella and gets a few people sick, they'll shut it down, but Big Agri gets to radiate it. They get to spray all these special chemicals on them. And it turns out it's not just governments. Out of the top 100 economies, over 50 of them are corporations, not governments. They're all in there. It turned out with Fox over a decade ago making payoffs and advertising to not let local Fox reporters in Florida do a report on studies of what the synthetic growth hormone was doing to people. I mean, no kidding it was making kids grow weird. No kidding it was making people go into puberty early, and they got shut down. And so it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. I know for a fact that in radio, because I've worked in radio, and when I worked at these stations, you would sign non-disclosure. So it was not me that they were censoring. It was the fact that I just couldn't talk about the news segment because I discovered it and asked. I mean, I was ignorant like 16 years ago, 17 years ago. I'd say, we're paid in the news to have the person read this? That's actually paid? And they go, yeah, and keep your mouth shut. You got a non-disclosure. And I learned that was at all the big news stations. And then they got a huge contract by a state quasi-corporate entity. And then basically they came in, it was the LCRA, Lower Colorado River Authority, and said, we don't want you to ever talk about the LCRA. They're a news sponsor. And I went, well, who are they? I didn't know 16 years ago. Then I looked into them, and it's like basically a mafia. I'm not saying everybody there's bad, but it's a big water grab by corporate interests that get the money. They've had a bunch of scandals. I mean, that's how involved they were. And later I was kind of told, listen, dummy, you're not going to be on the air soon. We're getting other payments. And so later, only years later, did I click, all this state and federal money came in to get me off the air. And I think from doing the research that I was partially taken off my first radio job because of money from the government.
And a similar thing happened to me at CNN. I mean, Bahrain, the actual regime would call the news desk to complain about my reporting. And after repeated calls, I started noticing that it became more and more difficult for me to get stories online. And I was forced to ridiculous statements from this regime that we knew was Gaddafi and Assad-esque. And instead instead of taking them for what they were, I had to actually include their lies, which included statements saying that protesters were putting makeup on to fake their injuries and fake blood. I mean, I had to include these ridiculous statements into my reporting, Alex. And I believe the network just acquiesced to its paying customer. And that's what we're seeing across the board in the mainstream media. And as long as I've been in the field of journalism and worked for the mainstream, I've been censored at every single job I've had. So I'm a firm believer now it's nearly impossible to do muckraking investigative journalism at these outlets. And that's why it's so important to support the independent media, because they're the only ones able to actually report the truth 100%.
And as that comes out, and as people learn that all these big channels are bought and paid for, and even local news channels are, people are leaving them en masse, so there's a vacuum for people to not go to college to be a journalist. I'm not saying that's a total waste, but you don't have time, folks. Go out, follow it, do the story, report it. You're not going to be perfect. Just get your facts right. We all see through rose-colored glasses from our own prejudices deep down and things, but just stand up for the Bill of Rights and Constitution. Stand up for common sense. Pick issues you're concerned with, start a blog, be a photojournalist, shoot video, go cover protests, support the First Amendment, support liberty, and there's no way they'll stop us all. There's a reason they want to shut down the independent press. There's a reason they want to attack protesters that are peaceful, to create a chilling effect, because the system knows we've got the moral right. They want to control that, and that's why when you put out a book like this, I think it's self-published, isn't it?
No, it's published by Whitman Press. They were an amazing company who really, they don't normally do political books, Alex. It took a lot of convincing, but at the end
well, I know who they are, so I think they do put out their own books, but I think they also help folks. But that is just fantastic that they did this with you. And so people should get your book to support your ongoing journalism. They should support Infowars.com. They should buy our products. They should support everybody. Ron Paul's media operation, Ben Swine, everybody. I'm not in competition with any of these new journalists, whether they be more liberal-leaning or conservative-leaning or libertarian-leaning. If they just tell the truth and promote basic liberty, we're all brothers and sisters in this together.
Exactly, and I think it's super important to support the independent outlets. I mean, that's the best way, I think, to give money if you're about to donate to charity, because that's kind of what journalism has had to become. I mean, we now rely on donations because it is difficult to work for these outlets anymore and to play with the system. And so we've had to become almost like a nonprofit to survive as journalists.
Exactly. And now the fascist Dianne Feinstein wants to restrict everybody else take away any tax exemption from private groups. Of course, we don't have that, but others. And then the government will decide if you're a journalist and if you have journalistic protection. Give us your take on that movement, fairness doctrine for talk radio. And then we're going to cut to our reporters in the field, Lyon McAdoo and Jakari Jackson, who I know may have a few questions for you. Leanne's going to be interviewing you tonight. And then, of course, you can take the talk in any direction you want. And so give us a preview of what you're going to talk about on the Nightly News tonight, a double serving of the intelligent and also, of course, beautiful Amber Lyon with, of course, our reporter Lyon McAdoo. But give us your take on the move to have the government declare who's a journalist and who isn't.
I just think that's ridiculous because most of the journalists who we're calling journalists are lapdogs these days, not watchdogs. So I consider more of the independent press to be the more real journalists. But the way the government wants to word it, the mainstream journalists would be considered journalists, whereas the independent press would be at risk of as not being considered journalists by the government. So I think it's something that's so changing right now and evolving that it's nearly impossible to define. And I think if you are out there exposing government crimes and writing about it and being a watchdog, you are a journalist. And you don't need a definition. And a definition is only to further make it so that the independent press can be just considered bloggers and potentially face criminal charges or be forced to reveal their sources. And
Amber Lyon, you're not just as important as CNN or as the New York Times. You're more important because you've shown that you got forced out of CNN where you were, a rock star, up-and-comer, taking over 3 Emmys. You got forced out for your integrity. You left via your integrity. And so you're not on par with CNN. You're above them. And it shows that CNN's bought off, that they had record viewers for Piers Morgan's history when I was on, and they admitted to me when I saw his producers in Houston that, no, we want you on. The higher-ups have said no. And they said, we want you back on. We want ratings, but we've been told no. So if I failed in that interview yelling at him, no, I didn't. I broke the spell. I said, look, this is all a fraud. You're paid by Big Pharma to put kids on drugs that are making them kill people. The insert says it, Piers Morgan. It says it can make you be a mass murderer. So stop blaming my Second Amendment when if you want to blame anything, it's your sponsors. That's why they're scared to have me back on, even though it's been voted #1 thing of the year. What do you say to that?
Well, it's true. There are decisions being made, and I saw it directly when I was working there, that had nothing to do with the journalistic value or getting viewers. And that was something that I couldn't wrap my head around while I was there, because I would come up sometimes with some story ideas that I knew would really generate a significant audience and had a lot of journalistic value. And those stories were sidelined. And I couldn't quite figure out what the reasoning was, but there are decisions being made there that aren't that have nothing to do with the journalistic value of a story or getting viewers, and that's disturbing. It's who's making these decisions and why. And we saw that with the Occupy movement as well.
That's what we cover here, is if it's important, it's breaking, it affects our liberties. We don't think black, white, old, young, male, female, Christian, not Christian, Muslim, whatever, gay, not gay. We think, is it freedom? Who's the little guy? Is it the system trying to take our rights? And then we go out and report on it. And then, of course, for us, that's exciting. That's exciting to everybody else. And so we're successful. I mean, telling the truth is successful. People want it. Amber Lyon's our guest till the end of the hour. And we're going to go now and get her take on this. Lyon McAdoo and Jakari Jackson are there at the Capitol. They've been doing man on the street out there about Texas making kids not be able to bring Christmas cards to the schools. And we had that report up earlier, and Lyon joins us. Lyon, before you go in after the break and talk to one of the state reps about their view on this, would you like to say anything to Amber Lyon, who you're going to be interviewing tonight?
Well, hello, Amber. Obviously, you had to deal with, suppression of the press, but what do you think about the fact that Texas actually had to pass a law to allow people to just say Merry Christmas or hand out Christmas cards?
I just think it's a slight overreach, and it's obvious you guys are reporting on it. It's just ridiculous.
Well, they had to pass the law, but still schools aren't letting kids hand out Christian Christmas cards, or even if it has a tree, they're saying no. And now the school's backed off, but Here's a headline today, Newsmax. Christmas trees banned at Texas school called draconian. And I mean, it is a Christian holiday, but it's not even religious to have a Christmas tree. I mean, this is crazy. We're losing all our basic rights. We're losing our Fourth Amendment. We got foreign banks robbing us. We've got our press being bought off by foreign companies and foreign governments. And then they're making the threat, Amber, a Christmas tree.
Yeah. And I think anytime and that's why I'm glad you guys are highlighting this story, anytime we face any infractions on our First Amendment rights, it's just a slippery slope. And so what's going to be banned next? And that's what disturbs me in this situation. And that's why I'm glad you guys are taking the lead and covering this story.
Well, when we come back here in just a minute, they're going to walk into a state rep's office and ask them, and I'm sure they're just going to say no comment. It'll be 1 minute, and then we can come back to you and finish talking about the book. But let me go back to McAdoo here as we have 1 minute till we go to break, and we'll come back with our guest talking about her book, Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray. Leanne, real quick, whose office have you chosen to go in and ask if they support schools violating the state law, not letting people have free speech and hand out Christmas cards?
We're going to go speak with Senator Wendy Davis.
Okay, so and do you have any idea if she's there?
I don't believe so. It looks like everyone's out for the season, so.
But, I mean, is there an aide there you can talk to?
Yeah, well, there's someone there at the front door.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to go to break. When we come back in 3 minutes, we're going to go right to that. And I'm sure we're just pointing out that we know, and then it'll come to the senator's attention that last time I read, she was, not supporting the bill to let folks have trees and stuff in public. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, come on, we don't go to other countries and say, well, the majority's Muslim, so you can't have Muslim, days or whatever. It's just ridiculous. Our guest is Amber Lyon. The book is Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray. It's a coffee table photojournalist book, but with also great articles. Everybody should get it. We'll tell you where you can get it when we come back. All right, I've been watching live feeds during the break. TV viewers at prisonplanet.tv could see it without the audio. Some guy came up where they were in the Capitol and looked like he said they couldn't be there and directed them into a side office. And look, he gave them hall passes or something. You don't need that to be in the Capitol. I mean, I go in there all the time. I don't get permits to protest either. Jakari or Lyon, what just happened? Lyon, tell us.
Well, they just told us that we need to seek permission to bow before our senators and to get footage.
During our commercial break, Alex, we were out in the Senate gallery, and a very nice gentleman named Austin came over and told us that we need to seek permission to film the Senate gallery. I did inform the gentleman that it's not our intention to film the Senate. Told him we wanted to speak to one of our representatives.
But there is no Senate in session, and you don't need permission. It's a right when it's not in session. Yeah. He's just henpecking you to be your boss, and I don't care if he's polite, robbing our First Amendment, even though he's doing it polite isn't nice. What has he now said to you?
He's basically given us the address where we can seek permission to film here and...
Yeah, but notice there's no state police talking. The state police are not talking to you because that's made up. So ignore him and go in Wendy Davis's office. Where is that?
It's right behind us.
All right, go walk in there. My God, or let me talk to that idiot. Anyways, all right, so it's closed, it's gone. We're the press there showing it.
Davis, is anybody available to make a statement on her behalf?
There they are.
How can we get in touch with her? Can we send a call or email? Or I see one of these business cards. Is that the best way?
I mean, this guy literally is just trying to henpeck us out of there. The state police didn't stop him. You don't need... Media's in there every day and doesn't get permission. Okay, I'm sick of color of law crud. Let me get Amber Lyon's take on this, three-time Emmy Award-winning CNN journalist. This is what we're talking about. There is no law. There is no regulation. There is no permission to be in the Capitol unless you're in somebody's private office where he drugged them in there. I mean, what do you make of this another bureaucrat? It's not the state police. They know the law. What do you make of the bureaucrat trying to do that?
Well, I think that they're trying to avoid your questions more than anything. And I think that you do have a right to be there, obviously, as reporters. And I'm appreciative of your efforts to actually hold political elites accountable and not become lapdogs like you see at these mainstream press conferences where the press just becomes puppets to the authorities.
Sure.
I think that your approach is a true investigative journalist approach. And that's when you should be walking up to these officials with a microphone in hand, questioning them about their behaviors.
Exactly. Now, Lyon was going to interview you and tape it for the news tonight. I know you're doing a big speaking tour there. Would you like to take a 30-minute break when this show ends and have Lyon get back and interview you, or do you want it to be David Knight?
It's whatever you think, whatever you prefer works for me.
Okay, I mean, so you want to take a 35-minute break or so? She'll get back, and then we'll call you on Skype, and then you can talk about whatever you want with her tonight. They were asking me, I've been asking the questions. I'd like to have you on and just basically cover whatever you want with Leanne. How's that sound?
Okay, that sounds great. Wonderful. I can take 30 minutes. I've got time.
Okay, you're very sweet to do that. If not, David Knight's a great reporter. I mean, he'll do the interview too. Just it's up to you. What do you want to do?
Yeah, I can wait for Leanne. That's fine. It's only about 6:50 in the morning here. So
right, we'll get some coffee or take a nap, and then she'll be back in 30 minutes, and then she'll get it fired up and do the interview for the news tonight. Thank you, Amber. Briefly, how do folks get your new book?
Yeah, you can go to peaceloveandpepperspray.com and order the book there. And also I have special signed copies that really help promote and support my journalism on the site that you can buy as well. So just head to peaceloveandpepperspray.com.
Say it one more time.
peaceloveandpepperspray.com.
All right, Amber, we're going to let you go. We'll call you back in about 30 minutes for the interview with Leanne McAdoo.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. All right, Leanne, closing comments. Are they saying anything else to you there where you try to defend Christmas at the Capitol?
No, they're behind a locked, bulletproof door, and it's standard procedure. It seems to be with the same with the Obama administration. If you're a journalist, if you're a reporter, they just direct you to the White House website to get your talking points.
Yeah, well, you know what he did. He literally just made up stuff to you. Of course, you need permission to talk to a senator, but not to be in the Capitol. So he did that. He did it very politely, but it was an attempt to violate your First Amendment. So I want you to talk to that rat again and then have it on the nightly news, because I want to show what he did. We're going to do a little bit of overdrive, but Leanne, get on back to the office with Jakari. Great job.
Well, joining me today is Amber Lyon. She is a 3-time Emmy-winning investigative journalist and photographer. She exposed how CNN and other networks are paid by foreign governments to bring us sponsored content that makes them look good. She's literally put her life on the line numerous times, and then, of course, with her latest book, Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray, she has literally put her life on the line to report stories that are vital to the public in spite of potentially offending those networks that pay her. She's here with me today to talk about her new book, Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray. It chronicles modern protests in America. As well, she's going to talk to us about the state of media as it stands today. Well, Amber, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Sydney. I know it's nice and early there.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was worth waking up for this interview.
Well, so you said that you hope that this book is going to inspire people to stand up against corruption. So why does it seem like people in other countries, like we see in Thailand and Brazil, Italy, it seems like they don't have any problem standing up against the corruption in their country? Why do you think we're having such an issue with that here?
Well, I think that over the past several decades, the mainstream media has really demonized protests. They've made protests seem like it's something that only hooligans do, or bums and hippies, and people that just don't have a real message. And we saw that with the Occupy movement, when on September 17th, when occupiers hit the streets of New York, right away the mainstream media came out with stories just making them look plain silly. And so because of this demonization and this propaganda, I think that people have lost touch with the value of what protest means. And protest is, and has been throughout history, the common denominator for change in the United States. If you look at women's suffrage, you look at the American Revolution, gay rights, and every bit of change we've had in history has been a direct result of the people hitting the streets, voicing their anger, and telling the government that they want change. And so the purpose of this book, for me, and the value in it, and why I decided to spend a year traveling the country to publish this, was to remind the American people that protest is beautiful and protest is effective. I have protest coverage in the book of people who won. A group of retirees out in front of Occupy Century Aluminum, their employer had taken away their health benefits, and they camped out literally in front of the Century Aluminum smelter for nearly a year and got their health benefits back. Or these home foreclosure protests where people have been barricading themselves in front of their homes to keep the banks, and effectively keep the banks from entering and foreclosing on their homes. So people are winning throughout the country. in protest, it's just being underreported by the media. And so that's another reason I chose to publish this book, is counter propaganda, to really remind people that if we want change, we need to stand up and make our voices heard.
Right, and they do kind of want to silence how effective protests can be, and it seems like the police here have really started to, they're militarized. So if you're going to go to an anti-GMO rally and you're a mother there with your 3-year-old daughter who's like wearing a fairy princess costume to protest GMOs, you're being faced with these tanks, military tanks, and police officers in full riot gear, kind of an intimidation tactic. Do you think that that's more, I mean, you were in Bahrain, so how does that compare to a place like a police state like that?
Well, unfortunately, the streets of the U.S., when it comes to protests, are looking more and more like the protests and the police response I saw overseas in the Middle East. And that's really unfortunate. And I think it's in part due to lack of mainstream press coverage and lack of public outrage. We should be standing up and actually protesting the police militarization at protests, because it's gotten to a level of just absurdity. One time I was covering an anti-police brutality protest. This is a chapter in the book. And all of a sudden I look down the street and I see a truck pulling down the street. And on the back are these officers, police officers, dressed in full camouflage gear, wearing military boots, carrying weapons on their backs, as if they're heading to war. I actually named that chapter Afghanaheim, because it was as if in Anaheim, California, these soldiers were headed to Afghanistan. Wow. And when people saw that, it really put a shock on the face of these protesters, and also for me as well, to the level authorities are going to intimidate protesters. This was a protest that consisted mostly of women and children and unarmed men, and the police were coming in dressed like they're headed to war. And so that should disturb all of us, because it is an effort, I believe, to create a chilling effect, not only for protests, but also for journalism as well. And it's something that I think obviously has to disturb some of these police officers. And I'm wondering why more of them don't stand up and refuse to put on these ridiculous uniforms to police their peaceful citizens and really intimidate people from exercising their First Amendment rights. And I saw an escalating amount of police militarization as I traveled the country photographing for this book. And I think that's something that should wake all of us up, that we really need to pay attention to this, because we're not in martial law here, but it's looking more and more like we are.
Right, and it was really underreported that you, as a journalist, you were kind of on the other side of the riot police there, and weren't you actually fired upon? Was that in Anaheim that you kind of were, was it like beanbag bullets or something?
Yeah, a wall of police fired on me, and I was standing in the road photographing, and I was in such shock. I just stood still for a minute and then realized I was being, a wall of police were firing less lethal rounds at me, literally straight at me. And I had to run and hide between two trucks for several minutes to avoid being hit. And they call them less lethal rounds, but as I've seen overseas, they can kill. If one of those rubber bullets hits you in the chest, it could pierce your heart. Potentially, it could give you a concussion if it hits you in the head. So they are very dangerous. And the police were literally just indiscriminately walking down the street, bam, 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 firing in these neighborhoods. And when I came out, when I emerged from the trucks, I told the officers that I was press. I started yelling press, and one of them looked at me and said, "Don't you know how to cover a riot? You need to do it from back here behind the police line," where there was literally a pile of journalists just back there behind the police line, only seeing the protests from the police point of view. And because I was able to submerge myself with the protesters, I was able to photo document some pretty stark images of police brutality and injuries of pedestrians who just happened to be walking down the street, who were hit by this irresponsible behavior by the police department. So it was very important for me to be out there, but I was fired on as well, and I really felt the fear these poor citizens of Anaheim felt as the police just kept walking up and down their streets, firing upon these residents. And I was also really disturbed at the lack of national outrage and the lack of mainstream media coverage of this event, because it was one of the most disturbing events I've ever covered in my career.
Right, and it's supreme irony there. You're at an anti-police brutality protest, and they're firing upon a journalist that's there. And I'm sure the reports that came from those people standing behind the riot police were just how they were so heroic, firing upon these wild protesting hippies or something out in California. How dare they stand up for our rights and try to protect us?
Exactly. The journalists were calling it riots. When it wasn't riots, it was police firing on a group of peaceful citizens who had gathered to voice their anger at police brutality. And the media wasn't covering an NBC News car was actually hit by these projectiles. One of the drivers, he had come around the corner and he stopped because all of a sudden a wall of police were coming at him, marching down the street. And I have a photo of him just ducking down in his car, absolutely terrified, because the police had their guns drawn at him, and they ended up hitting the corner of his windshield. And so I thought, as journalists, we need to be watchdogs on authority, that NBC would have really raised hell about that on the nightly news that night, but they didn't. And to me, that was emblematic of overall the attitude toward the press throughout protests, to really stand on the side of authority instead of questioning authority, behaving more as puppets and lapdogs than what their true roles should be as watchdogs.
Right, well, we're seeing this again here. Tonight we just reported on the news about the peaceful vigil for the young man that was mysteriously shot in the back of the police car. They went to peacefully protest against the violence there, and then that they were pepper sprayed, basically beaten down.
Well, I think what's happening in police departments nationwide is when incidents of police brutality or suspicious killings under police supervision or officer-involved shootings happen, they don't really want noise to be made about that. So they want to suppress these protests, because protests and vigils draw attention to the police brutality and media attention especially. And so I think that's why these police departments really crack down on these with a heavy hand. And what they should be doing is really entering the community and apologizing and saying, okay, how can we help? How can we further, improve our relationship with the public so they're not fearful of us? And instead, we're seeing them pull up to these protests dressed as if they're headed to war, just firing pepper balls and bean bags on residents who are fearful. I mean, could you imagine living in one of these communities where in the book I cover Manuel Diaz, who is 25, just walking down the street in a residential neighborhood in broad daylight, and police approached him. And for some reason or other, he ran away, but he wasn't armed. And while he was running away, officers fired and killed him in broad daylight in the middle of someone's lawn in Anaheim, California. Now, can you imagine how these residents feel knowing that that's the way the police behaved? And there's a genuine fear amongst residents of police officers, and especially when after police brutality happens, then they also act brutally in policing these protests. And I believe that's a direct result of them not wanting these protests. They want to intimidate the people to keep them from protesting or holding vigils, because vigils and protests shine lights on the inappropriate behavior of these police departments.
Well, and you're never afraid to really get in there and put your life on the line. And does it ever just kind of make you want to just throw your hands up in the air, the fact that there's just so much complacency with the American people?
It is disturbing, but what really gives me a lot of hope right now is a lot of people are waking up thanks to the independent press, and I think people are really now able to just navigate the internet and find out the truth once they realize they can't trust the mainstream media. So we're seeing overall worldwide this conscious revolution, this evolution of consciousness, where people are starting to realize that they've been lied to or misled their entire lives, and now they're seeking the truth. And as people are absorbing this truth, they are fighting back. One of the most prominent examples is Syria. If we would have taken the official narrative for what was going on in Syria, we would have allowed another Iraq or Afghanistan. But because the people have had enough and now realize that they've been misled for so long, they were able to go on the internet and search for alternative media sources that were reporting the truth, and that Syria wasn't necessarily a black and white conflict, and perhaps the U.S. actually had a hand in creating this conflict in the first place for other corporate interests. Are able to realize that, they fought back and said, no way, we don't want to enter Syria. And so it's little moments like that that give me a lot of hope and want me, to continue down this path, because I know that people are waking up, and I know we're seeing change and change in a positive direction.
Well, it definitely highlights the importance of having independent media. And then, so as someone who, you did work with the mainstream media, you still kind of contribute, and being on that side of it, it's our job as journalists to check those in power. What do you think about the fact that so many journalists are now going to work for the White House, for the Obama administration?
I take the belief of Seymour Hersh, who recently wrote an op-ed in The Guardian, and he said, in order to change the mainstream media, what you're going to have to do is fire potentially 90% of editors and producers. And I believe with him, or I believe in him and what he's saying, because so many of these journalists have lost sight of the true meaning of journalism. And I'm not saying they're bad people, but they've just really lost sight of the fact that we are in this game as journalists to be watchdogs on authority, not to be lapdogs. And so many journalists, especially in Washington, D.C., have such cozy relationships with authority that they're not questioning them. Just watch any White House press conference. The journalists sit back like lapdogs and take orders, when really they should be constantly pressing the government for answers. And so I just think that right now these outlets are filled with people who have lost sight of journalism, and it's time to clean house and start over, and that's what the independent press is doing. And we're seeing that it's working, because viewers and readers are now moving over to these outlets and abandoning the mainstream because they are waking up to the fact that that's just not journalism anymore, unfortunately. And for me, coming from the mainstream, that used to be so upsetting, because I'd want to see my colleagues asking more difficult questions. And instead, I had several of my colleagues actually contact me on behalf of government officials, telling me I needed to include their response, or complaining about a story I did, which really I couldn't believe at the time. And so I lost faith for a brief period in the mainstream, thinking that journalism had died. And fortunately, when I came out to the independent press and saw how many amazing muckrakers had left or had just risen out of the independent press successfully to do real journalism, it gave me a lot of hope, because journalism is alive and well. You just have to really search for it.
Exactly. Well, your stories have been silenced before in the past, but let's say this is your new segment here. What do you think is the most important story? What should we be talking about right now?
I think we're facing a mental health epidemic worldwide. I think that the anxiety of realizing the reality of the world and the lies and the deceit have really created that, and just our lifestyle in general, our food choices. It's really just created a mental health epidemic of anxiety and depression that has turned so many people into zombies. And unfortunately, one of their only options are these prescription medications, which only exacerbate the problem, lead to disassociation, lead to addiction as well. So for me, journalistically, I've realized that we need to come up with a solution to this, because it's become a nightmare that's paralyzing the country. So I've been working to investigate natural medicines that exist. Mother Nature, as I've learned, I used to be a skeptic, but Mother Nature has given us the tools to cure nearly every illness we have in our bodies, including mental illness. And these cures, these natural cures, are out there. And the industry knows about them, the government knows about them, but unfortunately the majority of the people aren't aware that these cures are there, because they're being suppressed and they're being demonized or made illegal because the industry can't profit from them because they can't be patented. And so I think it's really important to expose these options and solutions to really try to take the nation out of this. We're just at a standstill. I think mentally a lot of people are just stuck, and to give them options to heal their disorders and become productive citizens.
Well, exactly. They've got us all convinced that we need to get our health in pill form, that we can only get it if it's a prescription pill, when most of those pills are derived from plants. So why don't we just go directly to the source of what it is that's actually healing us and figure out, and rather than destroy the rainforest and everything that we don't even know what's out there yet, why don't we see how these plants are helping us and how we can use them? Because I agree, Mother Nature has the cure for everything if we just would stop fighting against it. So you've actually been doing some really in-depth investigation for, I guess, the last year on some different things that are healing people that we're just now learning. I believe it was CNN that's actually been reporting about, marijuana, and also saying that psychedelics actually make the brain grow and are helping. Maybe that's what had us evolve, and marijuana is helping with seizures and cancer and things like that. So why do you think we have such a stigma here in the U.S. because it's been classified as a drug that they want to control?
Well, we're facing a big amount of confusion in the United States right now between what is medicine and what is drug. And unfortunately, a lot of our medicines actually behave as drugs, whereas things that are being labeled drugs, as in marijuana and psychedelics, are actually medicines. Mm-hmm. And that means that the more you take these, the less you need, and they actually do cure the root cause of the problem versus just treating the symptom, and they're non-addictive. And psychedelics have incredible power to not only lead to neurogenesis, which is creating new brain cells, but also to cure the brain from anxiety, depression, and other excuse me, sorry, we're having some noise in the background in here, and other illnesses. And when I say cure, some people are taking these medicines, and within 2 days, they consider it to be 30 years of therapy. Within 2 days, they're cured. Whereas if they were to go the traditional route and take these prescription medications, they would never be cured. The medicines just cure the symptoms, or just treat the symptoms, and then oftentimes leave these individuals worse off than they were before, and potentially addicted to these medicines. And it's because marijuana and psychedelics are so powerful, and so they have such tremendous ability to heal, that they're being made illegal because they can't be patented, and therefore the industry cannot profit off of them. And I consider the lack of availability of these medicines for the main public to be one of the greatest human rights crises of the last 40 years. And so I've decided to devote my to relations, making people aware that there are solutions out there. A lot of people are trapped in the prisons of their minds and feel like there's no hope because these medicines have given them no hope. And there are solutions out there.
Right. It is such a shame. I mean, I can speak from experience. My father had to go through chemotherapy, and they gave him all sorts of, pain pills and everything. And he lost, he weighed less than I do. It was really frightening. The only thing that helped him was medical marijuana. He was on no pain medicine. It was incredible. He could eat. So, that right there was proof enough for me, because he went from a skeleton back to the healthy man that he has always been. So I know you're in Sydney, you're taking a break, kind of working on your next book. Do you want to tell us what's up next?
Yeah, so I'm just sitting down and hunkering down and gathering pages and pages of notes and trying to make it make sense. So I'm writing this book on natural medicines and showing people how they can access them. And so hopefully, if I'm able to make sense of everything I've seen over the past year quickly enough, the book will come out next year. So that's really been my main focus now, as well as really promoting my book that just came out, Peace, Love, and Pepper Spray, because I feel like that's a book that could go on and should go on coffee tables all across the nation to really remind people of the beauty of protest and give people something intelligent to talk about in their living room conversations. All you got to do is open the book and it will instantly ignite some kind of conversation, whether it be political or or heated, for that matter, but at least it's getting the word out there, and that's reminding people that protest is beautiful, and we need protest if we want change in the United States.
Right, exactly. Get people talking, get you and your family talking about something that's real. Obama wants us to talk about Obamacare with our families this Christmas, so that's definitely a much more interesting coffee table book, in my opinion. Well,
yeah, for sure.
So that's at peaceloveandpepperspray.com. People can pick that up for a wonderful Christmas gift and on into the new year. But
yeah.
Amber, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to whatever you've got coming up next, and we'll definitely have you back.
Wonderful, and thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.